are you doing? I'm Jane and I'm wondering if you, like me, have a few old glass jars kicking around the house or rumbling around the back of the car waiting to go to recycling. Well, if you do, I was hoping that you would add on to them and maybe we could upcycle them together. There are lots of ways of decorating glass jars, such as using napkins for decoupage or glass paints. You can also cover the jars with tissue paper and pop in a candle or a tea light. One of my favourite ways of using old glass jars is just to simply leave them clear as they are and putting in some sand or pebbles, shells, or my favourite is putting in some sea glass and watching the light shine through and you can see all the colours. Today, I thought we could look at two ways of decorating jars. The first way is to cover the jar with wool or string and you get this lovely textured effect. And the second way would be to make a material patchwork jar, which is a super way of using up any fabric or material that you've got lying around the house. Now, to make the first type with the string or the wool, you'll need an old glass jar that you've taken the labels off, and a really good way to do this is to soak it overnight in a jar of warm soapy water, and by the morning you should be able to scrape off the label no problem. And some PVA glue, any kind of string or wool that you fancy, a brush for brushing on the glue, and a fine pair of scissors. Now, let's get that string or wool on your glass jar. It doesn't really matter if you work with your jar upside down like this or the right way up. It's whatever works for you. The only thing to consider is to take note of the bit that the lid screws onto your jar, because some people want to keep their lid and screw that onto the jar, so you don't want to cover that piece with wool or string. And other people don't mind and they decorate right the way up to the top. I like to work with the jar upside down like this, and let's get going with one of my favourite bits by clutching on some glue. And we just need to smear on a bit. And we do this section by section, so we don't cover the whole jar at once. We just do a small piece like that. I love this bit. It's really satisfying watching the glue spread around the jar. Now, there are two ways of putting on the string or the wool. Some people keep the wool attached to the ball of the wool, and other people take a section of string or wool at a time, which I'm going to do. And all you do is you tack hardy your jar and you pop the end near the base or the top, depending on how you're working, and you use one hand for turning the jar and the other hand for guiding the wool or the string to sit in the right position. So this hand is turning the jar and this one is guiding the string as it goes around. It's lovely to do this with nice music in the background. It's really therapeutic because you have to take your time and concentrate. And you just keep going until you get to the end of your glued section. Now, I wonder how you're getting on with decorating your jars. I'd love to see what colour of wool you've used or if you've gone for string. Now, let's continue wrapping some more wool around. You can carry on from where you've left off, or you can leave gaps in the jar and decorate it at random points to make a pattern. I think I'm going to leave a space and begin my next piece up here towards the middle. And it's the same thing again, spreading on the glue. And it's amazing how quickly it sets. Doesn't take long, a couple of hours. And it fairly hardens up the wool. There we go. A nice band of glue around the middle. And it's the same thing again. You take a section of wool and cut it to the length you want to work with and pop the end onto the jar, and depending on whether you're right-handed or left-handed, use one hand to turn the jar and the other to guide the wool around the jar, round and round. It would be fun to make a rainbow coloured jar with lots of different colours of wool. And you just keep going and feeding the wool or string around the jar. How does that feel? Right, and finally I'm going to put a piece of wool along the top there. My favourite part again, getting the glue on. Very therapeutic. There we go. Nice evenly coated so it's not dripping down the side. There we go. And this time I'm going to show you wrapping on without cutting it off first. And I'm going to start at the top here. Ooh, and pop on the wool. And I'm leaving this space here where the lid screws on, just in case I ever want to pop the lid on. And turning the jar and feeding the wool around as we go. It kind of feels that there almost should be a song for this part. Something to sing as you... It reminds me of Wind the Bobbin Up. Pull, pull, but I better not clap my hands. And there we go. And we just keep winding until we get to the end of the glued section. And here we go, we've come to the end of this glued section here. So we just need to snip the wool off. And as you can see, there's not quite enough glue there. So I'm just going to pop a piece of glue underneath. And there we go. I quite like that look because it allows the light to travel through the glass at different points. I'd really like to see how you've decorated your jars. I hope you've enjoyed it. Okay, and now it's time to make our patchwork material jar. I love these. They remind me of Mrs. Tiggywinkle, and I'm sure she would have one or two of these sitting up on her dresser, maybe in her kitchen. And the great thing about these jars is you can use old scraps of material that you have lying around and maybe incorporate some memories into the jar, maybe an old blanket that your bairn once enjoyed or a favourite pillowcase. So to make a material patchwork jar, you need a jar and some material, and you need pinking shears if you have any, but if you don't, then ordinary scissors are absolutely fine. And we need some PVA glue and a brush for spreading on your glue. Okay, to begin with, we need to cut our patches. I've just chosen 2 pieces of material, but you can use as many as you like. And I'm going to use my pinking shears, which give it a nice edge, to cut some squares out. Trim the edges of this one like this. Kind of gives it an authentic look. And then I'm just going to cut out a few patches. It's good to get them about the same size, but it really doesn't matter. In fact, I've seen some really lovely jars made where all the patches are completely random sizes and they're put together like a jigsaw. But for this one, I'm kind of putting them about the same size. Listen to that sound. Satisfying. Okay, now I've got my patches cut out. I need my empty jar, and for this one I'm going to work from the top to the bottom, because if you have an overhang, it's easier to trim it at the bottom than for the bit that screws the lid on. So rather than putting the glue on the back of the material patches, I'm going to put the glue straight on the jar. My favourite bit again, spreading it on. I find this so relaxing. I almost feel I need that music on to complete the experience. And pop the glue round the jar. And now we can put on our first patch. And I'm going to go for a stripy one. And I think I'll have the stripes going up and down. And I've kept the lid on the jar because it's easy for me to see the point to which I can take it up to. There we go. The PVA glue is really sticky and the material should adhere really well. And I think I'm going to alternate these patches. So I'm going to put a floral one on next and line it up to the stripy patch. And I'm going to keep going until we've got all the way around the jar. I'm already thinking, what am I going to keep in here? I kind of feel that this jar would need some sweeties in it. What are you going to put in your jars? Okay, I've reached the final piece of the patchwork jar, and I'm going to spread the glue on the bottom layer like this. It doesn't matter if you get some glue on the top of the material because it acts a bit like a varnish and it hardens up the edges. There we go. Okay. I've kind of alternated the designs of the patches. So under the stripe one, I'll put one of the floral ones, like this. I think they would make lovely presents. I'm already thinking who I might give this one to. If I didn't just keep it myself. And then a stripy one next. And don't worry if your patches overlap a little bit. It doesn't matter. It's a lovely way to use up an old sauce jar or jam jar. There we go. It's the great moment of putting on the final patch. There we go. Now, that's lovely. And you can tuck any bits or smooth any bits of material along the bottom there. And there you go. You can embellish the jar with bits of lace or ribbon or any other bits of material that you have lying around. It's totally up to you. And I've just made 3 of these patchwork jars. I've made this one today and this one a few weeks ago. And there's one that I have here. This one's got a piece of lace on the top. And as you see, they're very varied and completely different, a bit like my bairns. But I hope you enjoy making your material patchwork jar and can set it up on a shelf, a bit like Mrs. Tiggy Winkle.